me, the song "We Shall Overcome" came out of the labor movement. A lot of people don't know that, but the labor movement was about environmental justice, those
Yep.
coal miners that were going down, in the bowels of the earth and dying, because of exposure to either gases or the mine would collapse, so there'd be explosions.
Compost and cotton and cornrows.
Welcome to the Compost, Cotton, and Cornrows podcast, and I'm your host, Dominique Drakeford. Today, we're in conversation with civil rights and environmental justice warrior Catherine Coleman Flowers, an OG in this movement who is breaking down America's planned obsolescence, the disaster economy, and why every single one of us is an environmental steward, whether we claim it or not. Let's get into it. The Catherine Coleman Flowers, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. I'm just thrilled to have the internationally recognized environmental activist herself on the platform. But before we get started, I'd love to ground our conversation in knowing how you define sustainability.
Well, define sustainability as building something that's lasting. I think it's
Yep.
it's the opposite of planned obsolescence.
Building and creating and moving through systems and entities that are sustainable. I love that definition. Um, and I guess I'd love to start with knowing a little bit about your upbringing and experience as it relates to environmental justice.
Well, I grew up in Lowndes County, Alabama, which is located between Selma and Montgomery, in a very rural community. But what we did have was community, and the fact that everyone was either related or connected to each other and helped each other out. And during that particular time, people were, they grew their own food. A lot of folk, because we couldn't go to the grocery store every day. There was no grocery store on the corner. So that meant you had to plan how you were going to feed your family. I was in a family of seven with my mother and father and my five of us, sisters and brothers. And so they had to plan that. So they grew their food. A lot of what we ate, the vegetables and so forth, were actually grown by my parents. Um, we also had to, as it relates to sanitation, we had to come up with our own means to deal with that. So that was a large part of how I came to environmental justice. I just remembered one of the stark memories that I have is, the community was very, agriculture had once been known for growing cotton. And I
Mhm.
just remember how those families that were sharecroppers, it's like they always had reminders that that's what they were there for, that the rows of cotton would come up to their front door and to their back door. Uh, like everywhere they turned, they were going to see this. And the other thing that happened as it relates to environmental justice is that we had crop dusters. They would fly these planes and they were spraying chemicals on the cotton. And I just remember as a kid that we could see uh, dead snakes in the road or dead birds, and we later found out it was DDT.
Yep. 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 I learned about DDT, I think I was in middle school and I was reading Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, and that's when I first learned about DDT, um, which is insane. And I'm assuming DDT and sort of that segued into you wanting to be an activist around clean water and sanitation, correct?
Not really. It didn't happen just like that. I
Okay,
actually,
talk to me.
my parents were civil rights activists, and they fought for voting and civil rights. And so I had the opportunity to be around people that were part of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC.
Snick, yep.
So, so yeah, and I met people like Stokely Carmichael who would come to my parents' home. So I think that I grew up in an environment where I learned that if people stuck together and organized um, strategically, that they could make change. My, I didn't see myself initially as an environmental activist. You know, the environment was just part of my being. You know, I didn't see it as a separate thing. And,
Mhm.
but later, you know, I think my activism, you know, was really influenced a lot by my parents. You know, and I was an activist in high school. I was fighting for a quality education. So, which led to me um, working with my parents and other people and getting rid of my principal, getting rid of our superintendent of schools. And I write about that in ways, and ultimately changing the name of my high school. So all that happened before I was 18. So, you know, as time went on and I started teaching, I saw the need to teach history and for our young people to know who they were in order for them to know that they can fight their way out of any situation that they're in. I was in DC when it was the murder capital of the United States. I was a teacher there. And the way I inspired my students, and I was teaching at a junior high school at that time, I took them to Selma for the 25th anniversary of the Selma to Montgomery March. And they marched from Selma to Montgomery. These were seventh, eighth, and ninth graders. And the person that got on the bus with us every day was Annie Cooper. And if you saw the movie Selma, Oprah Winfrey played Annie Cooper in the movie. So I just learned through the years all the different things that it took to inspire people to make change or to believe in themselves. And then ultimately, when I moved back to Alabama after teaching in Detroit, um, I got involved doing economic development, and I realized I couldn't do economic development without infrastructure, and there was no infrastructure like sanitation infrastructure. But I also learned that people were being arrested because they could not afford on-site septic systems. And that's what led to my environmental activism.
I was gonna say, it's interesting because I did read your book, Waste.
Oh, wow, thank you.
Of course, in grad school, as I was unlearning the traditional, things that I was being taught about environmentalism and sustainability and just sort of the whitewashing narrative of it and sort of relearning how culture and community and Black folks in particular substantiated movements around environmental justice through various parallels and through various entryways. And I often think about MLK, actually, now that you mentioned Selma, and I know that like his Memphis strike was oftentimes like labeled around labor and civil rights, which is, and rightfully so. Before he was assassinated, fighting for that cause, it was an environmental justice cause, but it's not articulated in that way. How, you know, fighting for dignity or fair wages and safe working conditions, all of those things, all of those parallels, I interpret them as environmental justice. Um, and I see that we are often the vanguards of environmental justice, but it's not painted that way. Do you have any insight as to why and sort of how we can reframe our advocacy and activism and innovation as environmental justice, specifically for Black folks?
Well, I think, first of all, I think that when we define it just for Black folk, I think that we let other people off the hook.
Mm,
'Cause the system that perpetuates environmental injustice will perpetuate it on anybody for profit. And one good example of that, and then I'll give a more specific answer to your question, is East Palestine, Ohio, where the train derailed and the people are suffering. We've actually gone there and met with families and went into their homes who are suffering, and they remind me so much of the people in Cancer Alley.
mm,
And I think that when we compartmentalize it, uh, the people that are perpetuators are let off the hook. So that's my perspective. But in terms of the environment, I think anybody that grew up in a rural community, especially if they were poor, uh, probably were victims of environmental injustice because when they sprayed that DDT, there were also poor white families that were living out there as well, and they suffered. The cancer didn't stop because of the color of their skin, and the reason we need to change that is because we're all impacted by that.
Mm,
When I look at in terms of the framing of it, when you look at the whole labor movement, period. I mean, the song "We Shall Overcome" came out of the labor movement. A lot of people don't know that, but the labor movement was about environmental justice. Those coal miners that were going down, in the bowels of the earth and dying because of exposure to either gases or the mine would collapse, or there'd be explosions. Or if you look at Birmingham, Alabama, which is not too far from where I am now, a lot of the asthma and people are suffering because of, the industrialization of the area. But it wasn't done in such a way that could protect people and
right.
protect the air quality. I remember, you and I were talking about California earlier. Think about LA. Um, I was driving, we were driving the other day and I looked over, I think it's Birmingham, and the city was covered with fog. And I said, LA used to be like that, but it was small. So the injustices related to just industrialization without caring for the impact that it's having on the people and the planet, I think is creating problems throughout. But I think you're right. A lot of people that were at the vanguard of these movements have not been given their just due. We only look at it one way. But I like the way you frame that to make sure that we look at Dr. King's work in more than from more than one angle.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and thank you for that. The sacrifice zones of the folks who are most impacted are most certainly Black and brown and impoverished. But communities that can most easily be oppressed and systemically disenfranchised. So thank you for lifting that up. Um, I'd love to dig a little bit more into your movement building from a storyteller point of view. What gave you the audacity to write this book? Because it is a foundational book in the environmental justice movement, in my opinion.
You know, what gave what gave me the audacity to finish it, I knew when I was in the ninth grade that I was going to write a book.
Mm,
So I was writing and really a lot of what helped me put together the book was the collection of writings that I had already done. I actually started writing when I was 10, and I started writing poetry and songs. I was inspired by the Jackson 5. And then I started writing about what I saw around me. And, of course, my parents would make me go to these meetings with them. You couldn't say no because, you were a kid. So we went to these meetings and where I would pass my time was writing. I would, and at that time it was okay to leave kids in the car sometimes. So if I would be in the car, if they went grocery shopping, I would be
mhm.
writing. But I felt that it was, people always asked the question, and there were some people that were raising um, questions about why I was doing the work I was doing around sanitation. And I felt that when I wrote the book, I needed to explain who I was, and then people would see that it was a natural evolution.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do that without telling my story. But I wanted to also inspire young people. And in doing so, I had to tell about my activism as a young person, that I didn't just start. And it's also about being, resilient because the book starts when I was younger, but a lot of the things that came about in terms of, and then when I wrote the book, I didn't even have the MacArthur Award yet. That's it. I got the MacArthur Award the month before the book came out. So the book was already done. But the work, the work that we had done to um, c- collaborating with scientists and doing the parasite study, I felt that all of that was necessary um, to be told in such a way that people would want to read it. Um, when I wrote the book, I had the opportunity. Actually, one of the persons who reached out to me about, writing at that particular moment that it was the time was a doctor. His name is Dr. Paul Farmer. He's no longer with us, but he's the founder of Partners in Health and was involved in doing work globally around fighting AIDS and working in impoverished communities, especially in Haiti. But Dr. Farmer had reached out to me about writing a book, and one of the publishers that he worked with, they wanted a book that could be peer reviewed. But I felt that most people wouldn't read a peer reviewed book.
Mm.
So I had to, you know, use what I learned, and excuse me, in church, one of the things that I learned that Jesus used parables to tell the stories. And I thought that that was a way to get people to understand what was going on, was to make it plain.
Mm. I love
I
that.
love that.
Um, and that is a unique approach. Uh, and what was some of the most touching feedback that changed you a little bit from the book, aside from your MacArthur Award?
Well, what was interesting was that when I was writing the book, the publisher told me to write 2 chapters and send it. So I sent it to the editor. And what inspired me was that he wrote me back and just said his comments were, keep on writing. So I continued to write. And the process was I would be up late at night writing, and I had an editor who was working with me, and I would send it to her. She was in California,
Mm.
and we were both we were late night hours when it came to writing. I would write it. I would send her stuff at 2 o'clock in the morning, and she would be up.
That's right.
Yeah, she would be up and read it and edit it and get it back to me and make suggestions and so forth, to clarify things. So, but after writing the book, I think I'm most moved by the young people that have read the book and their comments. A lot of young people have told me that they decided on career choices based on the book. Uh,
Mm.
one person reached out to me, he was in California, and he had gone to Auburn University, but he grew up in Mobile, and he said he reached out to me and he said, "What made you write that book?" He said, "Because nobody up to that point had described my experience growing up." And he said, "That book is going to be different. It's not going to go anywhere anytime soon. It's going to be a classic." I don't know whether what he said was accurate or not, but I think that it was an opportunity to tell a story of a side of living in America, in rural America,
Yeah.
talking about the sanitation issue, something that we have actually hidden for so many years.
Mm. In your book and in Holy Ground, is it? Yeah, Holy Ground. Um, your writing is uh it feels poetic, and it feels that it feels there's a sense of urgency, but also a sense of hope, while also truth telling. And I'd love to know, how are you sustaining or advocating for hope while doing the work that requires us to confront, government neglect and structural racism and just generational harm and just trying to live on a daily basis? What does hope really look like for you, especially as an elder, as an OG in this space?
Well, I have to reflect back on when I was growing up. I've seen some things happen that my parents could not have even imagined. You know, I had the opportunity to go to the inauguration of a black president, but at the same time, I grew up at a time when black people weren't even allowed to vote. And so, and they were we were able to overcome those obstacles. I just remember when I went to Washington for the first time and I saw women working on telegram poles. I saw women working in jobs that I had never seen women working in those positions before. So I have seen a lot of changes. And I believe that in life, change is ever present. What I've also learned is that we have to be persistent. And the reason we are at this moment is because we stopped being hopeful. We thought we had arrived. We stopped doing the work. And this is why we have to go back and do the work again. But what makes me hopeful is that I know if we do the work, and then we will arrive at where we want to be.
Yeah, thank you for that. And speaking of hopeful, I'm thinking about policy especially, and I know that you have worked. What exactly was your role with the White House Environmental Justice Advocacy Council?
I was the co-vice chair.
Co-vice chair. Um, what do you feel like? Did proximity to federal power teach you anything about what actually will move environmental policy?
Yes, I think proximity to federal policy taught me how policy is shaped. And when I talked about sanitation, what I kept hearing was there is no data. There was no data because the question that was on the census was taken off that would have given them the data that they needed. And when I was pushing for policy about rural communities, they kept saying the same thing. So I realized that it's important to close down agencies that have this data because then you put the data that you want to be there, you shape the policy based on that.
Mm,
And that's one of the things that I learned is that we have to do the research. That's why it's important to have institutions uh, that represent the communities
yeah.
that are being impacted. Because if that information is not there, as far as the federal government goes, it does not exist.
So essentially, you believe that community organizations should be the ones collecting and synthesizing data.
Of course, I saw that in North Carolina with the North Carolina Environmental Justice um, Coalition. Basically, what they were doing, they were using community science to prove that those hog farms were contaminating the air, and soil, and the water. And they were working with students from University of North Carolina to collect that data, but they were training people to collect it and test it. They were even training high school students. So that to me is an example of the way we need to go. One of the things I can say about this moment, at one point, everything was federal, but at
Mm,
this point, all power is concentrated on the local level. And now we have representation on the local level that we didn't have in the 1960s and 1970s to make sure that this work is still going forward and being done.
right. Right. So, say we work with a reputable community organization that is collecting qualitative and quantitative data and doing rich ethnographic research. What then, at a local level, is the proper next step to push for policy in the environmental justice space?
Well, I think that information should be used to educate the people that make policy. A lot of times they make decisions because the policies they're getting is from the businesses who have hired these people to come up with what they want the folk to see
Hmm.
to arrive at their objective, which is to get that plant built in the area. There's generally no counter to that. But this allows people to see what's happening. And most folk, if they have the data and they live in the community, they do not want their community to be impacted in a negative way. We were just watching coverage of an area in Texas where there are people that are buying up water in Texas. And the way they're doing it, if they can dig the deepest well, they can drain their neighbors' wells. And initially, based the person who was doing this, their scientists were saying, no, it's not going to drain their wells. But when the people started doing their own research and found that that was not true, and they were able to convince people that were their representatives in the legislature to change that policy as a result of having the counter information. But it was the local people that did that. It didn't happen from Washington. So I think the difference is we have to there's a lesson to be learned even in this moment. We need to make sure that we have people on the local level and the state level educated to what their decisions are doing because they are living in the community and they are impacted too. Those people that are just coming through and leaving,
Yeah.
they don't really care. It doesn't impact them the same way. So we have to make sure that we have the right local people elected on the state and local level, and that they're also educated by this data. And that's the role that community organizations and colleges and universities can play. And high school students, because there are a lot of really smart high school students out there
Yeah.
that are doing a lot of community science work.
Thank you for that. I think that that insight is really critical, and there's a gap from information to advocacy to pushing for policy, and you just gave great examples of a through line and how we need to formulate and push and be educated on what's happening and how we can push for not only a paradigm shift in our understanding in what's happening on a human rights level or an environmental justice level, but also how we can collectively fight on a political level locally. So thank you for that. I'd love to get a little bit of your insight on AI and data centers and if there is a clean water sanitation issue or opportunity as we think about the future of AI.
Well, um, well, I think that first of all, AI is data driven. If the data is not there, AI cannot produce it. They're only going to produce. They only can put out what is there. So I think there are deficits as it relates to local issues uh, when it comes down to AI, and the people that are going to uh, that can benefit from it the most are the people that the AI, has their information and data. And those of us that don't are going to suffer as a result. My concern about AI is that it can never replace human ingenuity.
Right,
It'll never be able to do that. And I would not want a robot to come to my house to repair anything.
that part.
I would rather have a person that I can talk to, a person who can think, who could change if they have to, or think that maybe I need to do it this way instead of that way, because that computer is going to do it, or AI is going to do it the way it's been programmed to do it, and that's it. So it's not going to think outside the box. So I think that's a shortcoming as it relates to data centers. I'm very concerned about the current paradigm for data centers, which is that they use a lot of power. And the latest figures that I've seen that a lot of data centers could power the energy they use um, could power 80,000 homes. And also, they use a lot of water. Some of them are really water intensive. And I'm concerned about that since we have a shortage of water scarcity. And then, of course, the other concern about AI is that the pollution, if it's unchecked. I think Memphis is a good example of that.
Yeah.
But I think that there should be community engagement where the community's concerns should be addressed, so they can make sure that if they're put in place, they're using the best renewable energy that's out there, that the consumption of power is not passed on to the homeowners and residents that live in that area.
Yes, agree wholeheartedly. Yes. There's so much conversation around AI from both the positive side and the innovation, and there are a lot of young people who are coming up with really creative and innovative ideas to mitigate environmental detriments, while on the other side, again, sacrifice zones of communities disproportionately and the environmental detriment and toll that it has on local communities. So I always find it interesting and engaging to get different vanguards insight on data centers and just the future of AI. But I love that you mentioned human engineering and community has to be a focal point of the future of AI. What do you feel like is one of the most ignored truths about sustainability or environmentalism, etc.?
I think one of the most ignored truths is that we're all environmentalists.
Ooh, elaborate.
Well, all of us care about some form of the environment. We care about whether you're an outdoorsman, you like to hunt, whether, you're like, those of us that like to sit and watch birds, uh, that guy that like to make sure his lawn is cut, and people are watching the weather to see if it's going to rain before they wash their cars. I mean, we're all, um, and although I think the language sometimes divides us and make us not realize it, but we're all stewards of the environment. I think we're all stewards of the environment, and I think we're all environmentalists. I think it's the way you look at it.
Got you.
I think it's the way you look at it, like whether or not the glass is half full or half empty. But
Right.
there are people that love the beach. Isn't that environment? That's been an environmentalist because they care about the beach.
100%.
There are people that care about the weather. So that a lot of people make decisions about where they're going to settle later in life based on the environment.
Yeah.
They have to watch and pay attention. And although they may not care about what's happening in another city, but they
Right.
care about what's happening in their areas. They
Right.
don't want those wind turbines blocking their view of the beach, you know, or the people that feel like, I know I had to have a tree removed, um, from uh my home because it was so close to my house and so big and we were having all these storms, so I had to make a decision. And I'm not one for cutting down trees, but I'm not also not one for having a tree fall on my house. Because when I called the insurance company, they told me that they couldn't do anything unless the tree fell on the house. you know but that is the way we deal with things oftentimes after it happens. That's why we have a disaster mentality, because there's a disaster economy. But at the same time, I think we all make decisions about what's best. If we live in we live like if you're in California, you cannot be concerned about or ignore the fire season.
Yep.
And when we're and a lot of us that grew up at a certain time, since I'm an OG of the movement, I just remember Smokey the Bear. We grew up seeing Smokey the Bear telling people not to start forest fires. We grew up seeing the person who was a fake Native American crying, because we're defiling the environment. So I think that we're all environmentalists in our own way,
I
some more than others.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely love that. Um And I think if we all wore that as a badge, it would continue to inspire or evoke us to do more research and to continuously be activated. But we all have a stake in the environment in different ways. Whether, like you said, beaches, clean air, your personal health, what you're consuming. We all are environmentalists. Catherine, I'll make that into a t-shirt if it's not done already.
Yeah, okay.
Oh no, wait, that's not sustainable. More energy and more materials. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
And then you mentioned something about we live in a disaster economy. What exactly does that mean?
To me, it means that we wait until something bad happens before we do what we're supposed to do. It's like, you know, that intersection is bad
Yeah,
and it needs a light, but 10 people have to die before we put a light up.
that part.
I mean,
It's profit in that.
yeah, there's a simple way of saying it. Or we know that um, we know that we need to prepare for that fire.
Yeah.
But nobody's doing that. They're waiting until something happens
Mm,
before we deal with it. And I
mm,
think that's a large part of the problem. I mean, do we have to wait until the storm comes ashore in Florida to destroy places before we start building in such a way that it can withstand it?
mm.
And in the United States, you know, we build stuff to break down. We just build stuff to break down. I mean, I've been talking lately because of my own personal experience. I had 3 appliances in my home to go out,
Mm,
and I had to go back and buy others. And then I've been, you know, looking at um, some documentaries talking about how they're building stuff to fail. But that's part of, to me, that's part of that disaster mentality that we have. Put people on a point where they have no choice but to go out and spend more money as opposed to building things that can last and be more sustainable.
that part. Who
Yeah.
or what do you think is most responsible for the disaster economy?
The people that profit from it.
Okay.
And there are a lot of those, there are a lot of people that's profiting from it. I just remember being in a meeting where people talked about um after they had like a hurricane,
Mhm.
how they were going paying pennies on a dollar for land and rebuilding, and the people that lived there before can't afford to go
Land
back.
grabs. Land grabs.
Yeah.
Yeah, we saw that with Katrina
Yeah.
after what 75% of the people were displaced. Land grabs.
I'm
Yeah.
sure we probably see it in California too, where
Oh,
they had
and in
the
the wildfires, I
yeah,
was told that insurance plans were shifted or abruptly severed just before the wildfire. Like all of these different inputs and outputs that were intentionally making money for communities that would be impacted for sure.
yeah,
Mm,
and that's the sad part about it. We have to get to a point where, you know, one of the things that I talk about a lot more now is spirituality and my religion, and I just grew up at a time when we thought that, you know, it was idyllic when we went to church and went to Sunday school. They talked about the Garden of Eden, and everybody got on, and everything was sustainable, and everything we needed was there. We have that if we
yeah,
manage it correctly. If we become the stewards, the good stewards that we should be of God's creation. And I had the opportunity recently to go to Italy for the 10th anniversary of Laudato Si. And it really kind of reinvigorated me. And I think that we use language sometimes to divide us. But the
mhm,
word that I brought away, that I came away from there with, was environmental stewardship. We should be stewards of the environment, all of us. And in doing so, then we can build buildings that can last hundreds or thousands of years as opposed to breaking down. I'm just afraid that people are going to use AI to design something that lasts long enough for you to forget that, you know, that whatever is wrong with it happened out of a flawed design as opposed to something that's going to last. If we use AI for that, I think we've done something. Let's figure out how they built the pyramids and see if we can build houses to last that long.
that part. That part. Let's figure out how to really utilize technology for regeneration in that way. I love that.
Yes, I
Um
love that.
that right, that part. I feel like this is a great place to land. A term that I've been recently swimming in is spiritual ecology. And I love just the intentionality of recultivating our relationship with self, with earth, and really aligning and cultivating connection points so that we begin to expand our stewardship. I think innately their crisis is a crisis around relationship and connection. And a lot of that is rooted in spirituality and the ways in which we are just lacking those foundational footprints to connection to source, whatever you identify that source as. And so I love that piece on spirituality and religion and connecting with source so that we can step into our stewardship more provocatively, on an individual level, on a household level, a community level, a cultural level, a global level, all things. So thank you for all of the beauty that you gave in this conversation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for bringing it out of me.
Of course, of course. I mean, I'm just grateful to just have this connection point, and to know that your work continues to ground us in dignity and accountability and moral clarity on how we fight and also how we build and connect. So thank you for your continuous advocacy from that 9-year-old who started writing. Thank her, right? Thank her for your contributions for real, for real. I'm deeply appreciative.
Well, thank you. And let me ask you a question.
Yes.
How did you come to get the book?
So I got my undergrad is in business environmental management, and my master's I got at NYU in sustainable entrepreneurship and fashion. And as I was between the two, the bridge between the two, because I went straight from undergrad to grad school, and I've always been knee deep in creating my interpretation of what sustainability and environmentalism means. Traditional institutions, I feel like there was a gap in what the truth was. And so I intentionally re-educated myself by finding Black and Brown Indigenous authors who were speaking about sustainability in from a different vantage point than what I was being taught in school. And so your book was part of my library of relearning and centering different voices who I felt were missing in mainstream discourse. And so you are part of my resource library. And one of the many books that I'm like, go read this, go read it, even though I need to reread what I was reading 10 years ago, but it is a staple. As I believe you said, a young boy, a young man who read your book called it a classic? A classic. I think that was the language you used.
Yeah, that those were his words. But
Yes.
I think
Girl,
that
not girl, you a whole grown
oh,
woman,
that's
but
fine.
it is a classic. I don't there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Yeah, it's a classic.
Well, thank you. I was just curious because a lot of times I go places on the book tour for the other book, and
Mhm.
people have ways they bring it with them because they want me to sign it.
Mm.
I'm actually I'm supposed to be writing on a whole new book.
Okay.
I'm gonna get to it.
Okay. In due time. Make sure you are resting and centering health and wellness, all the things. And before we part ways, what I'm doing this season is called a sustainability soundtrack. And so I'm going to ask you a few rapid fire questions to contribute to the soundtrack. Let me know when you're
Okay.
ready.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. What song is bringing you joy in this moment?
There's a song that I always refer to, especially during this season.
Hmm.
Uh, it's Yolanda Adams.
Nice.
The battle is not yours, it's the Lord's.
Okay. Let's add it. What song is healing or is bringing you wellness when you are going through really tough times?
Oh wow, that's a tough. I probably say the same
The same
song.
one? Mhm.
My mother was killed in a murder suicide
Mm.
December 12th, about 23 years ago. And the song that I wanted sang at my mother's funeral was that song, the version that Yolanda Adams did. But the other song that I can say, and that one was sang at her funeral too, is "A Change Is Gonna Come."
A change is gonna come. That's a good one. And thank you for sharing that. And of course, sorry for your loss.
Thank you.
A change is gonna come. That's a good one. And I feel like that might be a response to this last question. What song sounds like sustainability?
Um, what song sounds like sustainability? Lift every voice and sing.
Yes,
Yeah.
Till Earth and Heaven Ring. Okay. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Haven't heard that one yet. Okay. Okay, Miss Catherine. Well, I think we're down to our ending. If you can tell folks how they can stay connected with you and or where to find your books, whatever way you want to, tell people how to find you and your work.
Yes. I can be found. I have a website. They can go to www.creej.org. Our organization is the Center for Rural Enterprise and Environmental Justice. The books are available on all platforms, both Holy Ground and Waste. And they can also find them in their local bookstores. If they're not there, you can order them. But they're definitely on all the major platforms.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time and energy. And that is a wrap.
Thank you.
Now, if this conversation moved you, share it with somebody who's ready to move from awareness into action so that we can build together. See you next time.
Composting cotton and cornrows.
We've turned nothing to gold since the birth of our soul. It's ingrained in our room. Black is more than flesh and bone, planted deep in our code, and we bear the fruit. Yeah, they wonder how our stride's so bold, and our pride stone cold after all we've been through. Rich as the texture of our crown. We pass it on to the youth.